Welcome to episode 4 of the Ponder Pod. We are studying the Gospel of John because we want to believe that Jesus is the Christ, and by believing have life in his name. That's John's goal for writing his gospel, and that is our goal for studying it. I am Laura. I'm joined today by Mike. Welcome back.
Great. Love to be here.
So this week we're in John chapter 2.
Yep. Hey, I got a question for you really quick.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So do you know how many podcasts there are out on the internet today? Just overall, how many podcasts?
I have no idea.
4.5 million. But do you know how many Ponder Pods there are?
If I had to guess, there's only just the one.
Just one, and we're in. Welcome to the Ponder Pod. I just thought that was incredible. Anyway.
Thank you for that.
If I interrupted, I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
Of course, you know that you interrupted. It doesn't matter. So we're in John chapter 2.
Yes.
And we follow along with the workout, so you can find that online, tcbchurch.org/John. The workout primarily this week is going to focus on the second half of John chapter 2. That's where we see that our big truth this week comes from. Jesus is the revelation of God, the temple in flesh. That hopefully sounds familiar, as that is very reminiscent of our first big truth. Jesus is the revelation of God, the Word in flesh, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So that primarily focuses on, again, the second part of the chapter. But some things happen in the first part of the chapter that I don't want us to just skip over. So we'll start with the beginning of chapter 2, but just can you give us just 30 seconds, kind of remind us where we've been, catch us up kind of contextually to what's happening right now.
Okay, so the context now moves when you open up to chapter 2. Jesus and his disciples, they find themselves in Cana, which that's in Galilee, near the Sea of Galilee, which really becomes his headquarters eventually. So they're in this town of Cana. Significance of that is that's where a lot of his disciples are from, so they know each other. John is writing now to really introduce the public ministry of Jesus.
So let's look at it. So far, the only thing we've really seen of Jesus' ministry is kind of, to your point, at the very beginning of that, the calling of the disciples. And so now we have that, and we turn into now this next event. So John picks up verse 1 of chapter 2, and he says, "On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. And when the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, 'They have no wine.' And Jesus said to her, 'Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come.' His mother said to the servants, 'Do whatever he tells you.'" And so then it kind of walks through just some of the specifics of what happened here. They had these big jars that were ready for kind of the purification rites that the Jews, was very common to the Jews at that time.
In any event. I mean, they're there because there's going to be a lot of Jews there, and they go through these hand-washing events, and all these are water parts there.
Jesus tells them, you fill it up with water, and then he says you take some out, and they taste the water has become wine. One of the things that I think is just fascinating in this narrative is like for something that is so miraculous, it doesn't tell us anything about like how it happened, because that's not really the point. Like it says it very kind of plainly. They took the water out, and when the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine, he did not know where it came from. And it's like the specifics, the mechanics of all of those like questions that we would want to ask of, but how, or what exactly, like that's not what we have, because that's not what's important. And so that's one of the things I want us to talk about as we look at kind of this narrative. If we can maybe zoom out from just the specifics of this narrative and use this as kind of a template for some of our study. One of the things that we've said kind of throughout our study of John so far is that to study, and kind of the difference between study and read is study is going to ask questions of the text. So it's not just going to go through and like, skim over the words. It's going to slow down. It's going to ponder, to think, to consider, and to ask questions of the text. But we also know some questions are better than others. We want to ask good questions of the text. And really, we want to prioritize what are the best questions of the text.
So let me reinforce what you said. I do think if you're going to study, questions are essential. It is a tool in study. However, all questions are not the same. I think the Bible plays that out, and even as you see Jesus interact with the religious leaders and here interact with his mother and others, even the way sometimes he will answer the question that they're not even asking to indicate you're asking is really just for curiosity. or just for the moment. It's not for ultimate learning or growth or transformation or even to know who I am really. So I think as we go through John, again, ask questions, but all questions are not the same. And remember, I do think a principle that helps a couple of things. One, rarely does the Bible or does Jesus give answers just for factual information in the moment. Even how he's going to answer the question later about the temple and says, this temple is going to be destroyed. And speaking of the resurrection, the answer he gives, they don't even understand in the moment.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot of understanding of how people grow and how we grow in that. So as you ask questions, it's rarely that the Bible just gives answers for short-lived information. Context matters. We want to continue because the context matters only in that it helps develop who Jesus is revealing himself to be.
Right.
So that guide of John 20:31, I think really helps in that too. John wrote this gospel ultimately for belief, so that from that belief you would live, and that life comes from in his name. Who is he? So I just say, I think a good guide is, what does this reveal about God? What does this reveal about him? I mean, clearly here, this sign was not to teach the fermentation principles of water. Right. It was to teach he manifests his glory so that the disciples would believe in him. We'll talk about that later. What does that mean? Their faith is deepening in him. Same for us.
Yeah. I like how you said context matters, because it is important. We can't divorce anything that we're reading from its context. Yes, exactly. We can't. But the context is also not the end.
That's right.
So understanding the cultural aspects of a wedding and understanding that if we spend 3 hours in our personal study time learning the traditional wedding festivities of a Jewish family in this time, has that really helped us to grow? And so you could say it's not unimportant, but it's also not the most important. And so when we're thinking about our study and our priority of those things, I think that's important to
I'll just add that really quick, even as we talk about what's the difference between a biography and a gospel. I mean, you have a unique piece of literature here in front of you called the Gospels, inspired by God, yes, revelatory, yes, but they're not a biography in the sense that, give all this information so that you'll know cool facts about this person. No, it is that you will know who this person is, and it will bring about belief and life. So therefore, the way you approach the text and ask the questions are guided by that, more than just, I need to know the facts. Facts are important. Right. They may help in the context, but it leads you somewhere. Yeah. I think that was great when you said that. Good. It's not the end. It leads you somewhere, and that somewhere is him. Who is he? Yeah. That's the goal.
There's a lot that we could talk about that, but unfortunately, we have to move on.
Come on.
But one question that we could ask and should ask is, why is this included? And we've talked about that a little bit already. Is it just included because it's the first? No. We know that John did not include all of the signs that Jesus did. Right. In fact, John 21, at the very end, he says that this book does not include all of the signs that Jesus did because, in fact, if it were to, the world itself could not contain
even online books.
The books that would be written. Can you just picture? I mean, that is insane. So he chose specifically, inspired by the Holy Spirit, which signs he would include. Sure. And those were for the purpose of believing and living. And so we see that same thing. Again, we see that to be true for the disciples. In this first sign, he manifests his glory, and his disciples believed. Yeah. And then we continue. We move on. That's the goal for us too. So we're going to get back to the second part of our chapter. Okay.
10 seconds?
10 seconds. Go. 10 seconds.
As you're reading through this, and by the way, I've got my nice notebook here because of big letters and space I can write with my pen. That phrase right there in verse 11, that he manifested his glory, I think it's hard to get past that without stopping and going, thank you. Because if he doesn't choose to manifest his glory to you and me, we never find it. We don't go hunting for it. No man seeks him. That's a point where you go, Lord, thank you. So that ought to guide your questions. Back to that point. At the end, he says, here's why we're doing it. He's manifesting his glory so you'll know him and believe and have life. That's when you almost have to stop and turn the pondering into prayer and thanksgiving. Good. Lord, thank you.
The workout's going to tell you to do that.
I knew that because I read the workout.
The disciples, they model for us the right response to that, which is belief.
Yeah, that's right.
It's faith. The disciples believe. That's the first time in the chapter that it talks about the disciples' belief. So now let's get to the second part. So after this, he leaves Cana. He goes down to Capernaum, and he stays there for a few days. And verse 13 picks up, John says, "The Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found those who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons and the money changers sitting there, and making a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and oxen. He poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he told those who sold the pigeons, 'Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade.' His disciples remembered that it was written, 'Zeal for your house will consume me.'" So I want to pause right there. Really what comes next is probably the most significant part of this passage, and we'll spend some time there too. But just kind of before we get there, we have talked before about context. You've even mentioned it in this episode. But we've talked about kind of 3 different types of context that we pay attention to in reading. One of those is theological, so that informs how we understand proclamations like Jesus is the Word. We've talked about linguistic, and so that acknowledges, the Bible is not originally written in English. Even when we read in the calling of the disciples, you have where he'll say, we found the Messiah, which means Christ. And so there's just a recognition of multiple languages kind of informing how we would understand terms and concepts and all of that. We also have historical. And historical context is one that I think is in particular helpful for understanding of kind of what's happening.
Yeah.
So you've got this narrative that's taking place in a temple. And personally, for me, when I think of temple, I think of just like kind of the equivalent of a church building. And so you have this kind of picture of just like our church building, here we are. But we know that that's not true. I found this picture online. This is from the ESV Study Bible. This is a picture of the Temple Mount. So really all that was included within the area of the temple. So you can, if you're watching, you can see this. If you're listening to this as a podcast, this is linked on the resource page. But what you can see in this is that this is not a church. This is not the equivalent of a church building. It's much more significant than that. And again, if you're watching, this is a human being, like this tiny little blip down here. So just the scale and the magnitude of this is really very significant. So help us understand from this, like, what's really happening? What do we need to know about the context of temple to understand what's happening in this narrative?
Yeah, so I think as you're reading along, 2 things ought to catch your attention and you stop and ask questions. One, they're at the temple. He's in Jerusalem, so he's left Capernaum, Canaan. He's gone up to Jerusalem because it's uphill. They're at this structure. This is a great artist rendering of what's called Herod's temple during Jesus' day. This would have been the temple where Jesus would have interacted, got the Holy of Holies and all that. So not only is this event happening at the temple, this event is Passover. So you got 2 things going on. Passover means this rendering is all correct except one flaw for this context. It would have been covered with people. I mean, there would have been thousands of people here at Passover. So imagine all these thousands of people. Jesus shows up. This, according to Scripture, the temple was to represent God's presence with his people. We know that from reading through the Bible 2025 last year. The tabernacle, when it was completed in the wilderness, the Spirit of God fills in the sense that God will dwell with his people. Then you have the second temple, Solomon's temple, and then you have this temple, which is Herod's temple. But again, it's a picture of God dwelling with his people. It's also intended to teach things about God. Everything here is designed to teach truth about God. So Jesus shows up, and it's not that.
Yeah, so when we read that there were money, like, why were there money changers? Yeah. Where were they? Why is that a problem?
So again, it's Passover. You bring your sacrifice, or when you get there, you get your sacrifice. And that's why they were selling these sacrifices. They were selling the pigeons, which were for the poor economic people. They were selling I think it says sheep and oxen, because it's Passover. And remember Passover from the Old Testament, all the way back in Exodus. Won't take time to do all that, but Jews out of Egypt, Passover lamb. And that was a rite or an ordinance that was celebrated for the next 1,400 years by Jewish people. It's going on here. So you bring your sacrifice, your lamb, if you will, as a picture. But they've complicated things because, as Jesus says, it's become, how does he say it here? It's really become a house of trade.
So Jesus' response to that really should inform even the way that we understand it. Like, he's responding really kind of like viscerally to what's happening, really like harshly. And so that should cause us to pause and ask, well, why does he respond this way? And kind of to assume, well, there must be a problem with what's happening.
Yeah. So it wasn't necessarily that they were having the sacrifices there. Mm-hmm. It was becoming a money-making scheme, and it became a distraction and even a barrier for those that were coming to truly worship. Mm. So the temple, which was designed to point to God, this outer court really is what we're talking about here. This didn't go on in the temple proper. It really went on in the outer court, which had been covered with people. This particular court was called the court of the Gentiles, which the Bible talks about that. My house is to be a house of prayer for all nations, or for all Gentiles. So they were to come, find a place of prayer, find a place that would point them to who the true God was. And instead, they come to a market that was all about consumerism. And even these money changers were just making money. You had to use the temple currency. You brought your own currency, you had to change money. Well, they were charging exorbitant rates. The point was they were becoming an obstacle to true worship. And that which was designed to point to the glory and the greatness of God was now all about self. It was all about this distorted religious exercise. It was diluting the picture and the glory of God. So Jesus, the true temple, which we'll see in a minute, was upset about that. Yeah. Not in a cruel way where he's trying to hurt people. Zeal for my Father's house will consume me. So he quotes that from the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. That's David saying that of a similar situation. That was David was king. Another messianic illusion. But Jesus says, look, worship is being inhibited here. Yeah. The truth of who God is not clear here. You're distracting it. And he does something about it. And then they're like, why do you have the authority to do this? Right. Which I think you're going to get to.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's, even you mentioned kind of the Bible 2025 and having tracked through like the temple, and in particular with our big truth, like seeing the temple as the revelation of God. Like that is not just that we would understand or that we would know the Word in flesh, but it's also that we would have access. Yeah. And so the temple is really representative of the presence of God. Like, again, to your point, we saw that throughout the whole Old Testament, and the tabernacle, and like have seen that just kind of woven through. We saw that in John 1:14, where the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. And so this dwelling place of God, Jesus is about to say, it's no longer the temple proper. It is me. And so we continue in verse 18 of chapter 2, and the Jews say, what sign do you show us for doing these things? Jesus answered them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. The Jews then said, it has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days? But he was speaking about the temple of his body. When therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. Next study principle. One of the things that's helpful for our study, occasionally, you don't have to do this all the time, but is to look at verses in just different translations of scripture. If you do that for verse 18, where the Jews say, what sign do you show us for doing these things? One of the things you'll notice, even in other English translations, is that the ESV does not really convey the concept of authority. Right. And that's the question that the Jews are asking is, by what authority do you have to do this thing? And so that also kind of reveals why there's a problem with the questions that they ask. And so the workout kind of guides you to think through that problem and the issue with that, and even in other places in the Gospels where Jesus would talk about the evil and adulterous generation that seeks a sign that would reject the authority of the God-man. And Jesus' response is, well, the sign, I am. I am the sign. I am the temple. I am the revelation of God. I am your access to the Father. I am the one that you worship. All of that is culminating in the person of Jesus. That's right. And so what just a glorious truth that we have revealed in that Jesus is the revelation of God. He is not the temple is not a physical just location anymore. Jesus is the temple in flesh. That's our big truth. And so,
Great.
I don't know, what else you got on that?
Oh, it's just so good. I mean, the question, you're right, it could be translated and say, by what authority are you doing this?
Right.
In other words, just put it in our parlance. Who do you think you are? In a sense. But they were also saying, this is the temple of God. In other words, they had enough reverence to know God gave us specific instructions of how this temple is to be built. Everything that goes on here is decreed by God. And here you are stepping in, telling how the temple should be conducted.
Right.
In a sense, they could be saying, do you think you're God? And to which he would say, yes, that's the point.
That's right.
I have absolute authority over this temple because of who I am. You don't even see it. And by the way, your issue is not that you don't have enough signs. That's the point of signs. He says that later in Matthew. Your issue is you don't have enough evidence. That's not your issue. Your issue is you don't have a believing heart. You don't like what you don't like what is being revealed.
You don't have faith. You don't have faith. You don't trust. Yeah.
You don't need another sign. That's not the point. The point is your unbelieving heart. But for him to say and kind of answer it in what seems to be an obscure way is again the point. I'm not going to answer all your trivial questions in the moment.
Yeah.
But I am going to declare truth. And that truth may not even make sense to you for a year, a month. We think this event happened at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. So it's 3 years later when the resurrection happens.
Yeah.
And John makes reference, his disciples, they remembered back when he said that at the temple.
Yeah.
And it actually fostered greater belief in them.
Let's talk about that for a second.
And the word.
How many times has somebody told you something just like that you've never heard before, and you just, you just get it? Like, you know it. You all of a sudden know everything there is to know about that topic that you've never heard. That's not how we learn,
Rarely. Rarely.
And we like to think that it is.
I think we learn informationally that way. Okay, I don't know how this works. I don't know how to turn this on. Somebody tells me, I turn it on. I've learned a piece of information, but not transformationally, because you're talking about the way you think. The way
I'm
you
not
act,
even so good at that.
worldview,
I'm going to forget how to turn the thing on. You're going to have to show me again.
But transformation does happen, to your point, over time. You see that lived out in the disciples' lives.
In this one, John, he jumps ahead. I mean, spoiler alert, John. He's like, hey, when Jesus was raised from the dead, and if you're reading, you're like, wait.
This, really?
That's kind of a side thing. But
we'll get there.
Even the disciples, the disciples, not just the Jews, and not just that, they don't understand what's happening in this time. The Jews' response back to Jesus, I think, is really revealing for how we have a hard time, being aware of things that are beyond where we currently are. If I were to think back about Laura 10 years ago, I thought I knew stuff. And I thought I was mature spiritually. And I look back now at just what the Lord has done in 10 years, and I'm like, I didn't know hardly anything. And I hope that 10 years from now, I look back at Laura today, and I'm like, I didn't know hardly anything. Just revealed truth and growth and transformation and all of that. I think we have a hard time conceiving of something that's deeper than where we presently are. And so we always will kind of naturally default to the things that we already know. And so the Jews' response is, well, it's taken 46 years to build this temple. The Jews' response reveals that they are thinking in earthly terms. They cannot conceive of anything that is in heavenly terms. And I think that's a good takeaway for us as we would read, whatever we kind of initially think in response to the word. It's a good thing for us to ponder and to think deeply and to ask the Lord to reveal to us the things that are beyond where we are. And I don't know. I just think that's a helpful kind of it's not exact, I get that, but I think it's a helpful parallel for even our own learning, for our own pondering, and that really is why we would seek to study the Gospel of John the way we are.
That's exactly right. And I would just add that quick caveat. It's easy to read. Maybe you've been a Christian for 30 years, and maybe you've read the Gospel of John 20 times. I don't know. So we're starting the Gospel of John in our church, and maybe you're thinking, wait a minute, I already believe. These things are written that you may believe. If you conclude, I already believe. So John is really not that applicable to me. You don't understand, number one, how learning takes place, and secondly, what belief really is.
Yeah.
Belief is not this static thing. I believed back then. It's this ongoing process by which, as we behold him and learn more and more of who he is. These are the disciples. This is year 1 with him, walking with him. Year 3, their faith is deepened so much because they know more of who he is. They've
So
walked with him.
That's a really good place for us to end, because next week, we're in John 3, and we're talking a lot about belief there. Yeah. And so I'll just remind us as a church, again, these things are written so that we would believe and live. And so let's pursue that together. Again, resources available to help us. But with that, we'll see you next week. This has been the Ponder Pod, which exists to help us study God's Word. You can find the workout and other study resources online at tcbchurch.org/John. You can join Prepare on Sunday mornings or Behind the Message on Wednesday nights to help you study alongside others in our church family.